So on today's episode of The Crucible, we've got a special guest with us here, Kelly Woodland, and you're going to hear a remarkable story about not just his career, but also about his, as he likes to call it, growth and evolution. So let's get right into it. Kelly Woodland is the Managing Director of Leadership Equity at United Way of Greater Philadelphia and Southern New Jersey. There he leads initiatives that promote leadership equity among Black nonprofit leaders. He's founded the Center for Leadership Equity, providing professional development and support for Black nonprofit leadership. Prior to that, Kelly, you served as the Executive Director of After School All-Stars Philadelphia and Camden, which was part of your expansion of that organization's reach. He's also secured some funding for that organization. He created a STEM program for Black and Latino students at the Franklin Institute, and later led the community revitalization efforts at Philadelphia's Point Breeze neighborhood. Kelly's work is focused on creating access and opportunity for people of color for over 35 years. He co-founded the African American Leadership Forum, which conducted some groundbreaking research on Black-led nonprofits. You can find that online. He also co-founded the Black Nonprofit Chief Executives of Philadelphia, supporting over 350 nonprofit leaders. In recognition of all of this work and your contributions, Kelly was honored with the Urban Affairs Coalition's Community Leadership Award in 2022. Kelly, welcome to The Crucible.
All right, thank you. Appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Absolutely. I mean, so as you know, this entire conversation is based on these crucible moments, right?
Yeah.
These, you know, a crucible is a severe test that you must go through. And so what we want to take a moment to talk about is your crucible moment. So if you would share with the audience what you might consider to be one of your greatest failures, professionally or personally, whichever you like.
Yeah, as you mentioned, I've had a career that's over 35 years. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of ups and downs, there's a lot of stops and starts. And I've never really looked at anything as a failure per se, because when you look at it as a failure or a success, there's a certain degree of finality, as if you just stopped. And that's why I always kind of use the frame of growth and evolution. But when I look at my career, I would say that crucible moment was probably about 12 years ago. Okay. When I was at a regional foundation. And at that point, I had a good run of about maybe 20 years of steadily moving and ascending in the nonprofit sector. Feeling good about the work I was doing, feeling proud about the affirmation I was getting from the community that I was serving. And I found myself laid off. So at that moment, there were a wide range of emotions, oftentimes rooted in my self-worth. Because when you're in this sector, in this nonprofit work, you're doing it because you're motivated by a personal incentive. Yeah. You want to make a difference. So yourself is wrapped up into your work. So when you struggle, the feelings are both professional and personal. So getting laid off, I felt a feeling of really being invalidated.
Yeah.
So that was very difficult for me. And it caused me to take a step back, reevaluate things. But the interesting thing about it, because part of the Black experience is dealing with struggle and continuing to keep it moving.
Yeah, no, that's true.
So I don't think I ever fully processed the impact or the weight of that moment as much as I felt this commitment to keep it moving and to try to find that next step, try to reimagine myself, try to recreate myself in this space.
Okay.
You know?
What do you think was driving? I mean, I love that point about the Black community, and we do have this thing where we want to move forward. But what do you think was driving your commitment to just keep it moving?
Well, throughout my life, there's always been moments that have challenged me to be agile. you know, I come from a loving family, a very supportive family, but there's been periods of disruption. And the way to process it or the way to cope is to keep it moving.
Yeah.
You don't really stop and get help. You just keep it moving, and you feel that if you change the condition, then you correct the problem. So I think the motivation and what I had gotten in a habit of doing for most of my life was just to deal with the issue by trying to keep it moving and trying to get another opportunity. So what ended up happening, I was laid off on, I remember, March 24th, 2012. 2 days later, I picked up a contract to do some work. A week later, picked up another contract. Continuing to work, continuing to try to be relevant or important for the outside, but also for myself.
Yeah.
And in the process, I think never really dealing with the issue of being separated, of feeling invalidated, and trying to replace what I had through other types of work experiences.
That that makes a lot of sense. It resonates with me personally because this podcast itself was started during one of my crucible moments, which was a layoff. So what you're saying is ringing, so true. There are those moments of feeling inadequate where you, especially when you're. So it's interesting because I'm not as familiar with nonprofit work.
Yeah.
But the work that I do from a DEI standpoint is work that you pour yourself into very similarly, right? So this idea of your worth then connecting directly to the work and wondering, if I'm doing all this good out in the world, why is this the impact that I'm receiving? So that really resonates with me. So the what I think is interesting, and I think folks would want to know, is how do you move through that? Like, what is your process for moving through that? Like how do you handle dealing with those emotions, putting them aside, and so actually handle the mental piece of it while moving forward? Because like you said, a lot of times we suppress it and we just move forward.
I think what happens is getting to a point to really finding out what your why is. And I had to find out why I did what I did and really revisit that, and also separate my professional self from my personal self and regain a sense of value for who I was. And part of that comes from just the evolution and just becoming older and further away from the trauma, so to speak. So the more distance you get away from that situation, the more you become more grounded in understanding what your why is. And I think what happened is I continued to do a lot of work that I felt was important to me. And what I also realized is that when I reflected on my work, relationships have always been very important to me. And everything that I did was really focused on building strong connections and relationships. And what I had to come to grips with was that some of those relationships that I thought I held were actually transactions. They were not relationships. So I had to come to grips with the folks I actually had relationships with and really consider them as part of my circle. Those that I had transactions with, I had to recognize that they were not necessarily in the Kelly Woodland business, so to speak. So that was all of the process. And I think what happened is over time, I became more grounded. I understood why I did what I did. And I also understood that if this were to happen again, what are the most healthy ways to cope with it and to move on off it?
I love that. So it's what I find interesting about these crucible moments, and I've said this, several times in leadership workshops. I've said it to friends of mine. It's essentially a fork in the road, and one road or even better than that, it's like a stoplight, right? But you have an option. You stop or you go.
Right.
And a lot of times these crucible moments, they stop us in our tracks, and we don't learn from them because we stop and we hold on to that bitterness. And so I love this idea that you've learned from it. And so my question to you, which might be a rephrase of the question that I just asked, I feel like you might have even started down this path with the answer, is what is the learning that you got from it that prepares you for the next crucible moment, right? Because we have these moments that come and they go, it's ebbs and flows. So what would for you be the big takeaway that the next crucible moment that comes, it won't have the same impact?
Well, like I said, I think at that point for many years, although I had a good run and I was doing well, but a lot of who I was and how I saw myself was predicated on how I felt other folks saw me. I'm at a point now where I see myself the way I feel about myself, and it's not dependent on how others see me. So what I try to do now, and I think some of the work that I'm doing professionally with the Center for Leadership Equity is in supporting other Black nonprofit leaders to help them manage the work and themselves in what they do, because this is very stressful work. It is exhausting. No one goes to school for it, but we all go to an education of lived experiences which bring us to this work. So part of what my responsibility right now is to share what I've learned and to create situations and resources for people so that they can be more effective in their work, but also understand who they are. And one of the things that I've done is do a wellness retreat for Black nonprofit leaders. We did one last year for about 45 Black nonprofit leaders.
Oh, nice.
And it is helping Black nonprofit leaders prioritize their wellness. And a big part of that is how they see themselves, how they support themselves, and how they prioritize their work, but also maintain a grounded sense of self.
That's, so it's interesting because, right now there's this idea, not even an idea, right? Like I think the Black community as a whole is now coming, to terms with having to deal with mental health issues, right? And so you see a lot of campaigns out there around getting to a space of, understanding that this right here has to, you have to take care of it, right? Like,
it's very, very real.
So when we were talking earlier, you said something that was interesting. We've all heard the phrase "Black don't crack," but then you kind of finished that phrase, and I'd love for you to share that with the audience.
Like you say, we say often, Black doesn't crack, and we take a lot of pride in that. But it breaks inside. And it comes because we are continually keeping it moving. We are experiencing trauma and either suppressing it or compartmentalizing and keeping it moving because there's a host of responsibilities we have. We have family responsibilities. We have community responsibilities. Unlike our counterparts, oftentimes we don't have a deep bench. If we struggle and go by the wayside, that's it for a lot of people. A lot of people depend on us. Not only the community, but our families, our immediate families. So when I experience my setback, my challenge, like I said, I kept it moving, but I could feel that I wasn't necessarily addressing or coping with it, but I was, and the pride that I took out of all of that is I didn't miss bills, continued to pay mortgage. My kids didn't even know. Even when I didn't have anything to do, I made a point to get up every day. Not necessarily for me, because I know I was in a depression, but I had to continue this image of keeping it moving because I had a family that depended on me. So I think here we are 12 years later, if I find myself in the same situation, I don't think I would deal with it the same way. But like I said, the black experience in America is such that, to a degree, we're always waiting for the other shoe to drop.
Yeah.
So nothing really catches us off guard. We're always poised to be agile and to, make, lemonade out of lemons. Yeah. We're going to make it work.
No, that's true. So it's funny because nowadays there's a terminology for the way a lot of us were always preparing for the shoe drop, and it's like this whole idea of side hustle culture, which has now become mainstream. Right. That's always been a thing,
right.
In the black community. Yeah. We're always like, oh, I'm doing this, but I also do this thing.
Yeah.
And so it's very interesting. Well, I want to make one more. I loved a lot of what you talked about, this idea of we have to find our why, right? Understanding your why, because it is really easy for us to, especially when you think about crucible moments as it pertains to work.
Right.
You're right. What we do is not who we are.
Yeah.
And so I love that. I think that will resonate a lot.
Yeah.
With folks. They'll find that being able to separate one from the other is probably.
And it goes back. Because I was thinking about this, my younger son is in school in Atlanta. Mm-hmm. And I was asking him, I reached out to him, I said, how are you doing? He said, I was doing fine. I said, how are you feeling? And he said, I feel good. And the one thing that I was very conscious not to do was to ask him how his grades were. Because if he starts to equate his academic performance with feeling good, then he's going to end up like me. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that ain't always a good thing.
Yeah.
So what I want him to be able to do is distinguish and discern. You can feel good even if you're not hitting all A's or B's.
Yeah.
That how you feel about yourself isn't predicated on these outside things. Because even if you struggle, you still, there's still joy and happiness to have in life. And what we've all been doing, this work thing, whether folks call it living to work or working to live, this work thing has played an incredible job on how we see ourselves.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, for viewers, they'll have by now seen my Crucible moment, which is really, it really speaks to that very thing. I did a talk one time called When an F is More Valuable Than an A. And a lot of that plays into, self-worth and what we tie it to, for better or for worse. So I love that idea that you're teaching your son that, that's one small sliver of life, and it's not necessarily the defining thing. And so, Kelly, thanks again for coming out, man. Really appreciate you sharing with the viewers that they need to get to their why. I love the idea of growth and evolution as being the thing of how to think about not failure, which seems very final, but this idea of growth and evolution, like what comes next. For those of you who have just found yourself on the Crucible, first of all, thanks for showing up. What I want to tell you is that you'll come to Crucible moments in your life. Some will come in very short spurts of time. Some will come over long periods of time. But when you get to that fork in the road, you've got one decision to make between stop and go. It should always be go. And what I hope you find from leaders like Kelly and other leaders who are gracing our room here at the Crucible is that there are multiple ways for you to move forward. As Kelly mentioned, we want you to move forward with your mental health in mind. Do it gracefully, recognizing that Crucible moments are just that, moments. Thanks again for coming out.
Thanks so much for watching this episode of The Crucible with Jeff Marshall. If you would like to be a guest on the program, let's be in touch. And be sure to stay connected with us through your favorite platforms. The Crucible with Jeff Marshall is part of the A Live Podcast Network and can be found in audio-only format wherever you listen to your podcasts. Production of this project was created by Gifted Entertainment, a full-service creative video production company.